As I mentioned before, this event is in partnership with Charlie Health and Care Solace. A little bit about Charlie Health is we are the largest virtual first mental health program for high acuity teens and young adults who are in need of in-depth mental health support. We provide adolescents and young adults who are struggling with mental health disorders personalized intensive outpatient treatment programs, IOP, consisting of group therapy, individual therapy, and family therapy, along with arranging ongoing psychiatric care and medication management if that's something that's needed. So, whether it is through partnering in facility discharge planning as step down care, or in supporting our outpatient care with partnerships with schools, psychologists, and universities who might notice that their students need more support than they might be equipped for, we fill those gaps where there are no providers in rural areas or long wait lists across the country through our virtual first and virtual only IOP. We have group therapy for 3 3-hour sessions per week, plus an hour of individual therapy and family therapy weekly, and with a matching system to ensure that our patients are in psychologically safe and supportive groups for impact and personal growth. Groups are created based on intake assessment and patient needs. Charlie Health was born with the mentality that access to mental health, especially in high acuity cases, cannot be a reason that quality of life or life itself suffers or dissipates. So that's a little bit about Charlie Health. I'd love for you to learn a little bit more about Care Solace. So I'm going to pass it over to our partner at Care Solace, and I'll let Ashley speak for just a moment.
Great.
Too.
Thank you, Amanda. Good day, everybody. What a privilege it is to be here with you all. My name is Ashley McDevitt. I'm the Director of Community Resources here at Care Solace. And here at Care Solace, we are tireless allies on a mission to make accessing mental health care easier than ever before. And we were founded, Chad Castorita is our founder, and through his own struggle with addiction and recovery, felt very called to this space to make a difference by making it easier for those in need to get the help that they need at that moment. So our team really acts as an extension of the mental health professional teams that we're working with throughout the country by connecting families to the right community-based resources. We're only able to do this because of partners like Charlie Health that share our vision and are committed to serving families and individuals with timely and high quality care. Our mission is to empower all people to find the right help at the right time for them and have the resources available to heal on their mental health journey. So excited about this webinar because this is one of those opportunities for us to connect mental health professionals together and empower us all with tips and resources to serve families and individuals that count on us in their times of need. So on behalf of Care Solace, I just wanted to say thank you for being a part of this webinar today and for all of your commitment to serving those in need. And Amanda, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you so much, Ashley. Really appreciate that. And I'm excited to, I don't want to talk for much longer. I'm excited to hear from our incredible team who's got wonderful information for you. So I'm going to introduce them both and then I'm going to pass it on to them. So first we have Megan Letterman, their pronouns are they, them, and they're the clinical director of clinical programming at Charlie Health. They're a therapist at heart with a passion for developing cutting-edge frameworks of care that live at the intersection of relationally focused, trauma-informed, evidence-based approaches to affirming clinical practice. And in their spare time, they direct and support a small Cambodia-based village dog rescue. And our other presenter that we have today is Catherine Kidd. Catherine brings over a decade of experience in the mental health field to Care Solace. She connects individuals and families with mental health or substance use issues to the services right for them and helps ensure that their team is running efficiently. Prior to Care Solace, she worked in community mental health as a child and adolescent therapist and was part of the clinical team for child welfare in Nevada. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Megan to kick it off. And thank you all so much for being here.
Thank you so much, Amanda. We're so excited to be here today with Care Solace and really want to talk to you about suicide prevention and intervention in schools. So gather, connect, and make safe. That's the premise that we want to introduce to you today as a mechanism for reducing the suicide rates in your communities to zero and in all communities. So what are we doing today? In terms of an agenda, we're going to do a quick intro and overview. We're going to look at trends in youth suicide risk and non-suicidal self-injury. Catherine's going to lead you through that. We're going to look at risks and warning signs and triggers. We're going to look at how to connect with students around suicidal ideation and non-suicidal self-harm. We're going to look at safety planning and at how to introduce a zero suicide culture in your school. As we do all of this, we're going to take 3 self-care pauses throughout the day, and we'll ask you a self-care question. I really want to encourage you to grab a paper and pen and write those answers down or throw them into the chat. Why? These self-care pauses actually exist on a continuum of safety planning, and we believe that through good self-care at all levels of our organizations and our educational systems, that can, it will and does transfer down to our clients and the students that we work with. And so I want to encourage you to participate in those self-care pauses with us today. They're going to become the basis for our safety plan at the end. So I have to begin this, unfortunately, with some difficult information, and that's that there's no algorithm that can predict accurately who will and who will not ultimately die by suicide. I want to bring in a quote from Joseph Franklin, Associate Professor of Psychology and a true expert in the field of suicide prevention. He says, we can only predict who is going to die by suicide slightly more accurately than random guessing. In recent decades, scientists have come to recognize that nearly everything from physics to biology to human behavior is complex. In other words, a very large number of things are combined in a complex way, and that's needed to explain most things. When we look at suicide research, the entire sum, of 50 years of research in suicide indicates that causes and predictors of suicide are indeterminate. They're too complex for us to create, in Franklin's words, a single algorithm or recipe for suicide prevention. But you know what? That's okay, because it's not our algorithms really at the end of the day that heal, right? And in fact, it's not treatment techniques in some cold, cool way or curricula in some cold way that really works. It's really people who work, our relationships, the conversations and the dialogues that we have with our students and our clients. Those are among the most important keys in facilitating change and healing. We need each other. And so while suicide is nearly impossible to predict, it's absolutely preventable. How is it preventable? Well, we want to cast a wide net. We can absolutely look at risk factors to figure out where to deliver services. We can cast a wide net together, connect with, and find ways to establish safety for every student that we're working with. How do you do that? I think it starts with identifying what students may be struggling. And from there, you want to look at how to connect. How do you build rapport in a way that allows them to talk to you about what's really going on? And from there, you can connect them to needed resources, refer them to resources that they may need both within the school communities, but also the wider communities and mental health treatment communities as well. So casting a wide net, it's not just about reducing suicide. It's also about offering pathways for thriving to the students in your care in ways that are going to trickle down into their communities and their families, really reverberating through generations. Wide net approaches are also anti-violent anti-violence prevention measures. They are anti-abuse prevention measures. They are anti-stress prevention measures. And so in this way, it's this wide net approach that we need not only to bring our youth suicide rate down to where it should be, which is 0, but also to attend to the wider wounds and challenges in our communities. So as we look at what skillful responding to suicide ideation or suicidal ideation in students looks like today, we're going to look, number one, at gathering, learning to spot those warning signs and risk factors within your student body, and also to help your student body develop a risk awareness. We're going to consider how and when to invite your students in for conversations and creative conversations. We're going to look at listening and connecting directly with your students about suicide and how to skillfully refer them to additional supports. And we're also going to look at basic safety planning, which is absolutely something that can happen in school counseling settings. Becoming a vehicle in raising awareness and responsiveness is something that you can do in your school. And so we will introduce protective factors and look at building a zero suicide culture. And finally, we're going to develop a simple self-care plan that you can use with your students to create and make safety. From here, Catherine is going to walk you through and get you very current on the trends in youth suicide right now on the ground. But before we do that, I want to invite everyone to check in with themselves, take a quick little pause, and ask yourself, what's one affirmation that you can claim to help you feel elevated? What's something that buoys your confidence or raises those good vibes? We put a few in the text boxes here for you to look at, but I'd love it if you could throw in the chat or write down on the self-care plan that you're working with, paper and pen style, some of these affirmations that work for you. I see them rolling in: validation and support. I deserve good things in life. I care about myself. God knows what I need. I am enough. I deserve good in my life. I'm deserving of happiness, health, love, and peace. Care about myself. Well, look at all these, Catherine, rolling in. So many beautiful things here. I'm deserving of happiness, love, health, and peace. And you know what? You are. And this is the first question that we often ask our students when we're working on safety planning. And we'll come back for the next question later. Catherine, I want to pass it to you to go into these youth suicide trends.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much, Megan. Hello, everyone. So let's take a moment to participate in a poll. Suicide is the blank leading cause of death among youth aged 10 to 24. The options are second, third, and fourth. Please type in your answers in the chat. Now, if you answered option 1, second, you are correct. Suicide is the second leading cause of death among 10 to 24-year-olds after a category of accidental deaths that include motor vehicle accidents, falls, drownings, and overdoses. So let's get into some youth suicide trends. All demographic groups across race, ethnicity, and sex experience increase in suicide risk between 2007 and 2018, but certain groups face greater risk than others. As mentioned in the previous poll, suicide is currently the second leading cause of death in children and adolescents. Native American and Alaska Native youth have the highest suicide rates, followed by white youth. Over the last 10 years, African American youth suicide rates have increased more than 73%. Males have a higher completed suicide rate than females. LGBTQI plus youth have a 4 to 5 times higher suicide rate than cisgendered heterosexual youth. Now getting into non-suicidal self-injury. Non-suicidal self-injury refers to the intentional and self-inflicted destruction of body tissue without suicidal intent. NSSI is most common among adolescents and young adults, and the age of consent is reported to occur between 12 and 14. NSSI is a strong predictor of suicidal behavior. NSSI and suicidal ideation share commonalities in that they function as an escape to internal stressors, communicating a form of distress and reducing dysphoria. Now we're going to take a quick minute to do a self-care pause too. Megan, would you like to jump in?
So sure. What's one warning sign that reminds you to pause for self-care? These are beautiful answers coming in: irritability, anxiety, desire to stay in bed. Yeah. You want to read some of them, Catherine?
Yes, I see a lot of frustration, irritability, low frustration tolerance. Yes, headaches, anxiousness, a lot of that. I agree, lack of motivation.
This is a really great question to do with your students when you're self-care planning, because when we know what our warning signs are, what are our red flags, we can jump in proactively to nurture. And I'm going to throw it back to Catherine to keep working through these risks and warning signs.
Yes, definitely. Thank you so much, Megan. So when supporting youth, whether it be in a private practice setting, school, or in the community, it is important to understand the risks, the warning signs, and the triggers in order to help raise awareness. Now, suicide is impossible to predict, but awareness of factors that elevate suicide risk can help you in supporting students. Some of the risks include past attempts, weapons in the home, a history of violence, prolonged exposure to bullying, mood disorders, substance abuse, a history of conduct disorder, and impulsivity. And also noticing some warning signs. There can also be warning signs that include youth constantly talking or writing about death, communicating about feeling trapped with no way out, hopelessness, withdrawing from family and friends, increasing drug use or alcohol use, giving away personal possessions that have significant meaning to them, doing dangerous, life-threatening things, regularly self-harming, and significant changes in mood. Now we can move on to common triggers in individuals that are high risk. Interpersonal loss, the death, or even parental abandonment can also cause some triggers in individuals, and recent incidents of either physical or sexual abuse, bullying at school or in the community, a sense of rejection, relationship conflicts, whether it be romantic or family relationships, recent suicide of a friend or relative, or even an anniversary of the suicide or the death of a loved one can also trigger Now I'm going to go ahead and pass it on to Megan to talk about community care and making space for us to listen.
Thanks, Catherine. Yeah, so how do we create spaces to encourage these kinds of often very difficult conversations to unfold? Well, the first thing really is just inviting your students to express what's going on for them. Sorry, we want to carve out intentional space for this to happen. Relationships at school are key for many demographics. For instance, in the LGBTQIA community, members of these communities face higher suicide rates, and yet research consistently shows that if they had one safe adult to connect with at school or in the community, that can be a touch point that actually allows them to survive adolescence and young adulthood, moving out into a thriving life. So we want to look at really remembering that those relationships are hard to come by, in any time that you can make space for a student in that way and be that supportive person that perhaps they are not connecting with elsewhere in their life. There you go, you're on the right road. How do we create vehicles to communicate distress? This is as important as the kind of evidence-based coping skills that's become so popular and is so critically important in our schools. So we want these programs that teach our students about cognitive behavioral approaches to habit building, to affect regulation, to positive mental health. This is critical. And at the same time, when it comes to really intervening when there's a crisis, vehicles for expression become key here. So it's not all about coping skills. Some of it is about finding those vehicles that your students might be most interested in, whether it's electric guitar or poetry, memoir, film, art. Invite your students to go on to come into your spaces and communicate with you in ways that work for them. Okay, and so we're here really trying to balance interventions where we bring the best psychoeducational and empowerment tools to our students on the one hand, and on the other hand, these very non-directive open spaces that we want to create to foster the kinds of relationships that will allow students to let you know that something's up. When a student shares material that indicates there may be a red flag there, follow up. Connect them to a school counselor who can refer them to assistance, or if you are a school counselor, work to provide that assistance. We're next going to talk a little bit about self-injury. But before we do that, I want to do one more self-pause. This is our last self-care pause. And the question is, what are some internal coping strategies that you might use when you notice your own stress levels rising? It looks like there's 3 questions here. So petting your cat, breathing, taking a walk. Yeah. And it's these coping strategies that we do want to be introducing in our evidence-based stress reduction programming that's delivered school-wide for our students, really helping them to plug in and identify what strategies work for them. Beautiful exercise, long walks, friends and family, car ride, music full blast. That's me.
Megan, I see a lot of walking my dog, petting my dog. I agree with that.
Yeah. This puts together 2 things, right? There's the animal assisted therapy and perhaps that connection if it's your pet and you love it very much.
Yes.
And when you hear the walk,
dogs do rule, yes.
Yeah. We run groups at Charlie Health, and a lot of the time, if the group is having a hard time connecting, asking, hey, does anyone have any pets at home, will be the best way to really connect that group. They will come and grab their dogs, put them on camera. But we're not all dog people. And so asking these questions and figuring out what are your coping strategies and what are your students, that's important. So the next question here is, who would you reach out to distract yourself if you're having a rough day? So this maybe wouldn't be a spill it all kind of a thing, but a rough day, who's my bestie that I'm going to connect with to take my mind off my troubles? This is another question that we want to be asking our students as we're doing safety planning and self-care planning. Daughters, friends, coworkers, family, spouse.
Family.
Okay, great. And then last question. This is a tough one for many of our students. They don't know who to name here, but who could you talk to if you really, really, like if you really needed help, if you're really in crisis? Who could you go to? A best friend, a therapist, a husband, a sister? Yeah. And when we're doing safety planning with our students, this is an important one too.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Is this question yours or mine, Catherine?
I believe it's yours, Megan. But
So,
I can ask it if you'd like me to.
It's okay. Do you think it's risky? Do you think it's risky, everybody, to ask directly about suicide? Do you think that would that put ideas into their head maybe? Do you want to go with open-ended questions and sort of talk around it, see if they getting a lot of no's? What do you think, Catherine?
I think they're right.
Yeah. We really have to learn as teachers, as therapists, as school counselors, as parents, that it's okay to talk directly about suicide. Are you thinking about killing yourself? Have you been thinking about suicide? Is suicide on your mind? Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful, everyone. Great work. Great work. Okay. So where does non-suicidal self-injury fit into all of this? Because this comes up a lot, I think, in the school environment. Well, first of all, it is the case that non-suicidal self-injury and suicide are correlated, but there are many more students who may engage in non-suicidal self-injury, but do not experience urges to act on a suicide plan. So what we want to do with NSSI is really get the conversation rolling, listen and encourage the student to talk to you about what's going on and make sure that you are communicating that you are taking their concerns seriously. Tell the student directly that you care. You want to work on acknowledging fears, despair, and sadness. And this is the case with suicidal thoughts as well as self-injury. Providing reassurance is a really big thing here. Help is available. When you're working on the NSSI part of it, this is a pretty big one. Try to avoid power struggles around whether or not your student's currently engaging in non-suicidal self-injury. Really work on looking at risk, looking at safety, ask if they're thinking of hurting themselves or taking their own life, and really work on validating those fears, the drivers of whatever it is that is creating these suicidal thoughts. What are some interventions to reduce non-suicidal self-injury? Yeah, this is a big question. And what do I mean by saying avoiding power struggles? So affect regulation is really a challenge for lots of students. And one of the ways that sometimes they do regulate emotions is through a coping skill of non-suicidal self-injury. And what a power struggle can do is sometimes escalate the student's urge to use that coping mechanism. And what we really want to do is come up with healthier coping mechanisms that they may be able to substitute for the less healthier coping mechanisms. But it's avoiding power struggles becomes important because you don't want to be a counterbalance that's pressuring the student towards less healthy intervention. I think that when you are working with a student that is using self-harming as a coping skill, by staying very neutral, you can be mindful to keep the treatment targets, which in the school environment are really creating safety and making sure there's a safety plan, the student is safe, and they have access to resources. That's the goal, kind of. Yeah. So more on talking about suicide with your students. So you want to directly ask, do you have a plan to die by suicide? You also want to directly inquire about lethality of means. So do you have any guns in the home? Ask about medications, and do be mindful that Tylenol is lethal when taken in high doses and is often a means by which kids do end up dying by suicide. Contact your mobile crisis support team or the emergency room, whatever your protocol is, and stay with the student if they are at such high risk that you really believe there may be an immediate risk of harm to self. Inside of suicidal ideation, you're often going to also have trauma disclosures and abuse disclosures. So report any of those that come up in the context of the crisis situation to the appropriate child welfare authorities. And finally, think about connecting to the student's family and connecting that family with a therapist who can provide intensive support or assist in referring to more intensive support like a PHP or an IOP like Charlie Health if that's needed. Okay, active listening. How do you do all these things when you're in the room with a student and they are very, very stressed out? Well, I mean, it goes back to our basic school counseling micro skills, I guess, using minimal encouragers. So as you're talking to a student, you may be nodding and saying, yeah, I see. You might say, can you say more? Can you tell me more about what's on your mind? Paraphrasing or reflective listening is pretty important. So stay very closely with your students' questions and statements. Try to pick out the juicy words and phrases that seem to have a lot of emotional investment in them and repeat those back verbatim. So you're saying that your mom is really getting on your nerves and in fact, about to drive you right out the house. Do I have that right? So if the client or the student said those words, I would be trying to repeat them back. The next thing is, this is tricky, but when we lose faith in our belief that therapy can help and that the mental health system can help, it unconsciously becomes communicated to our clients through our subtle, very subtle facial expressions, our subtle tones of voices. If you can communicate a belief that therapy will help your clients, that treatment works, that treatment can help, that will be worth its weight in gold. And then finally, you want to brainstorm with your student about how to increase their support network, non-professional support network at home and at school. And you're going to work the same techniques with families: listening, reflective listening, open questions, affirmations, using those minimal encouragers, and really communicating a belief in the fact that there is help for this family and this student. Buy-in or credibility, buy-in emerges when people feel like you're credible, you know what you're talking about, you're authentic, you believe what you're talking about, and you care about them. So that's that. Let's talk about safety planning and zero suicide culture. So putting together a a self-care plan or a safety plan with a student really is involves just asking essentially those self-care pause questions that we asked in the beginning. So what's one affirmation that helps you? What are the signals that you need to focus on your own self-care? What coping skills do you have? What social context do you have that you can lean on for support when you need a distraction or you need to connect up with someone? Who can you go to when you need real professional support? Who can you talk to when you need, I transposed 5 and 6 there, but who can you go to when you need friendship level support? And then finally, if there are any lethal means around, if there are unsafe features of the environment and the client is willing, removing those from the environment can be part of a self-care plan that really sets everyone up for success. So you can build your own template, but what we did here was just put together, we shared the template that we use at Charlie Health with our clients when they first come in. Okay, so I want to pass the mic now to Catherine for a pretty important, possibly the most important part of this presentation. Catherine's lived through some of this in a very visceral way and is going to share her experience now with a student struggling with suicide. Go ahead, Catherine.
Thank you, Megan. So much pressure. Okay, so yes, I would like to take this moment to share a story of actually one of the very first clients that I had that was experiencing active suicidal ideation. So in the early stages of my career, I was working as a community-based therapist in Los Angeles, working primarily with children and adolescents. I was working with an adolescent who was grieving the loss of his father. He was not only grieving that, but also he witnessed the accident that caused his father's death. So, needless to say, he was ridden with tremendous amount of grief, guilt, and significant trauma. So, the therapy sessions were conducted at school just due to family circumstances, and that was really the best place for these sessions to occur. And so during one of our sessions, very early on, he expressed to me that over the past week he'd been hearing his father's voice telling him to join him, and there was a significant pause. I remember reminding myself to be calm and present for this child that was clearly suffering. I conducted a risk assessment and I determined that he was high risk and required further intervention. So the client did identify a plan and a means to carry it out. And I did take some time there to remind him of the limits to confidentiality and that this would be one of those situations where it would have to be broken. He did agree. And so the parent, the school, myself, we all got together, we collaborated and included the student in the process as well, because this was important to develop a plan to prioritize his safety. And so he was ultimately hospitalized, and upon discharge, he had many supports in place that included medication management, increase in sessions with me, check-ins with the school counselor when needed, and a referral to a grief group. So as sessions progressed, his suicidal thoughts decreased, and he was able to process the feelings about his father's death, and was also able to share his trauma narrative with his mother during a family session. This was truly a collaborative effort, and really is a prime example of the importance of all of us coming together in order to facilitate this change. I really want, yeah. So
I'm so interested in hearing what you're going to say next coming out of this experience. Yeah.
well, I really would like to take this time to just talk about the importance of crisis planning, in a school setting. I know that Megan did mention a few things in previous, a little bit earlier, but I would like to take some time to give a little bit more details. So, if a crisis occurs while working with a youth within a school setting, it is important to first and foremost understand and follow your school's crisis protocol. That is first and foremost. Every school has different ways of handling crisis situations. And it is also very important to, in those moments, to remain empathic and calm, and if deemed necessary, to conduct a risk assessment, which includes that directness, the intentional questions. Are you feeling suicidal? Do you want to kill yourself? It might be very harsh to feel like you're saying. However, in these moments, it is very important to be very intentional with your questioning and offer very careful listening, and reminding the student in a very age appropriate way to the limits of confidentiality. And should you deem this youth a risk to themselves or to others, contacting the family is very, very important when something like this occurs at a school, within a school setting. Um, if appropriate, including the child in the conversation, and express to the child in a direct and a very compassionate way the concern for their safety, as well as the parent obligation to ensure their safety. So obtaining a written commitment from a parent to ensure their child's safety, whether it is to get a referral to their doctor, obtaining referrals to local mental health agencies, or taking them to a local psychiatric hospital for assessment, whatever is planned in that moment. Obtaining a written commitment from the parent is very important. Let's say the parent refuses any of these suggestions. It is important to also document, and because this may prompt a call to Child Protective Services. It may be a situation where some type of medical neglect is occurring. If this parent understands the severity of the situation and is refusing to follow any of the suggestions. So in the situation where a parent cannot be located and the child appears to be at risk, it may be deemed a medical emergency. A call for an ambulance to transport the child to a psychiatric hospital may be considered. Some postvention planning. So once a child is discharged from a hospital or experiences a recent crisis, it can look different for each youth. Some postvention strategies can include increasing weekly sessions, medication management, group therapy, PHP or IOP, like Megan mentioned earlier, programs upon discharge if admitted to a psychiatric hospital. So, and also something to also think about, just having ongoing trainings like for your staff to be aware of how to identify and assess for risk would be so helpful in order to increase their knowledge and confidence. And please remember that relationships are very, very, very important. Creating a plan that involves others can add so much support to that student.
Thank you so much, Catherine. Yeah. So much for that student. Absolutely. Thank you for that. Okay, so let's widen the lens a little bit. Zero suicide culture. Ethical responsiveness is compromised by stress and enhanced by self-care. So what does that mean? It means that our ethics are not a checklist, our machinery inside of our brain. Ethics are alive. And when we're stressed, it's really harder to live in the most ethically responsive ways possible. So here we want to work on and focus on enhancing self-care, self-awareness, and self-compassion, as well as mental health awareness for everyone, for you, for me, for counselors, for teachers, and for students alike. Create and nurture links between students and faculties and guidance departments. Encourage students, teachers, and faculty to communicate with each other about mental health. Encourage students and teachers to communicate concerns to the school counseling department. Encourage the student body to seek support when needed and to speak up, if they're worried about a peer. Promote a low threshold for concern. A low threshold for concern. I know that's so hard. We're working with so many folks who may be struggling, but if something feels off, address it right away. I think that's really the foundation for zero suicide culture is a low threshold for concern. It's that wide net casting. If something feels off, address it. And finally, model a culture of empathy and open communication. I think that the last thing we want to talk about before we jump into Q&A is just SAMHSA has a packet that you can use to work on suicide prevention and intervention as well as postvention in your schools. It offers screening tools, information about the warning signs and risk factors, really extensive parent education materials, research-based guidelines, resources that can help at the community level, and finally practices and protocols as well as to address and respond to suicide risk as well as to deaths by suicide, and finally educational programs for youth themselves and recommendations for increasing parent and school community involvement. Anyone have questions?
What is the suicide rate for African American children? Do we know anything about that? Is that increasing?
I know that the suicide rate for African American youth has traditionally been lower and unfortunately is on the rise. Do you want to take this, Catherine, or should I go into it further?
You can go into it further while I'm looking up.
So traditionally, the African American youth suicide rate was low, but tragically, it's growing, and I believe
it's about 73%. It's increased.
Yeah,
it's pretty significant.
Yeah.
But what do you do when the suicidal ideation happens in the home and the student's safe environment is school?
Well, we think, we're lucky stars, that the school is there, and we work to make that a foundation that we can build further supports on. I would be wondering what's going on at home. Although at the same time, I think we can get really too comfortable saying, oh, well, maybe we just need to involve Child Protective Services. Maybe you do, but there may be a limited reach of what they can help with too, right? And so we need to work to connect the student to community outpatient mental health resources as well that can help to do the family therapy and work with the home environment to create a safe space. It's such a good question though, right? Yeah. Sydney, this is a great question. Is it okay if I speak to this real quick? This question in the chat, Amanda. Well, so yes. Sydney says, how do you help younger students, elementary level, who want to confide in their peers and friends about trauma and feelings, but you're worried as a counselor about them sharing suicidal thoughts and feelings that may be dysregulating to their peers? Yeah. So I actually am not super familiar with elementary school age research, but I can tell you what I've read about adolescent level peer supports. And it's exactly to your point that they often struggle with the added stress of those roles. And so what we do with our student bodies is we want to teach them basic validation skills, but also any talk of suicide or trauma should be followed up with a let me connect you to someone who can help, to an adult who can help. So what would that look like at an elementary school level? Believe it or not, I think it would look like that, but roughly translated to a developmental language that an elementary school student could understand. What do you think, Catherine?
Yeah, no, I most definitely agree with that. Making things age appropriate, most definitely. And yes, linking them to the appropriate services. Um, I do agree.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much.